Okay, I think we are live.
Wonderful.
Great.
So 11 participants.
Great. So welcome everyone to Private Equity CXO's latest webinar, Building High Performance Teams, Talent Strategies for Private Equity. Thank you all for joining us as we dive into talent development and management within private equity-backed businesses. With exit timelines tightening and the need for value creation intensifying, understanding how to effectively manage talent from recruitment to retention has never been more crucial. This discussion will explore best practices for structuring human capital focused roles, integrating new teams, and leveraging HR strategies to align with overall business objectives and maximize growth. If you are not in a human capital focused role today, you will still be able to gain valuable insights as we go through these topics. This webinar is brought to you by PrivateEquityCXO, the world's largest digital community of private equity-backed executives with over 30,000 members. PECXO's mission is to help our community build better teams and drive returns in the private equity-backed middle market. I'm your host, Sarah DeMarco, and I lead the human capital search practice at Falcon. Falcon is a retained executive search firm which focuses exclusively on the PE-backed mid-market, helping portfolio companies find transformational C-suite talent. Today's event is sponsored by Centre, the revenue growth platform for private equity. We will drop their link in the chat so you can learn more about how to use their platform to optimize training and upskilling to fuel revenue growth. I also want to let our audience know this is an interactive session, so don't hesitate to submit your questions in the Q&A section as you have them. A recording of this webinar will also be available on PrivateEquityCXO's website. And before we jump into the discussion, I'd like to introduce each of our panelists and give them a chance to say hi and share a little bit more about themselves. So first up, we have Amanda Flagg. Amanda is a dynamic HR leader with over a decade of experience, including over 7 years in PE-backed companies. Currently, as VP of HR at Chronicle Heritage, she drives strategic initiatives for this global cultural resource management consultancy. Amanda, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a bit more about your background, that'd be great.
Sure. I just want to say thanks, Sarah, for having me. And I'm so happy to be here and share what I've learned so far in my time working within private equity-backed professional services organizations. And that's sort of my pedigree and where I come from.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. Next up, joining us is Maddie Hopsicker, an operating partner at Summit Park, a Charlotte-based private investment firm focused exclusively on the lower middle market. Here, she focuses on value creation and human capital. Maddie, if you wouldn't mind also sharing a bit more about your background, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. And thank you again for having me. It's great to be here. So I have somewhat of a unique background for this role. I joined Summit Park roughly a year and a half ago as a talent operating partner. Prior to that, I was working in New York City at Citigroup on the office of the CEO, chief of staff team. So come from more of a transformational background, but really excited and am taking in this role from that lens. So it's been great getting up to speed and working with all of our portfolio companies.
Great, thank you. All right, so jumping in, high level, we're going to be covering a few topics. We will start with how talent is structured within private equity, then transition into evaluating teams. Lastly, we will discuss how to maximize the value of human capital, and we will have time at the end for questions as well. But starting with the first topic of how talent is set up within private equity, Maddie, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, how does your role specifically impact what you are doing with portfolio company executives?
Yeah, I think it's one really great question that sort of level sets this entire conversation. And it's one that I actually am typically asking other talent operating partners, because every time I ask, I get a different answer as to sort of what their focus is or how they interact with the portfolio or the fund's operating advisors or other stakeholders. So it's completely fair. It's like, how do you operate within your role? So I just throw that out there that everyone's role seems to be a little bit different or nuanced. So I'm speaking from my experience. I'd say generally my role at Summit Park is I'm designed to quarterback improve and scale our talent efforts. So we have what we would call like a live working playbook to support our portfolio companies really day one through exit. So I sort of think of my role and the way I sit here as all encompassing, and really as I think about like the deal life cycle. So when I break it down there, I would say first and foremost, my role is heavily focused on human capital assessment during the diligence period. And so that's all things from the management team or the senior leaders that the company has in place, all the way to, what does the culture look like, or what does the back end, I'll call it back end or people ops look like? Is that functioning right? Or what do they have or don't have, or what are some of the pain points? I would say after that, or maybe moving off of that, would be, helping to manage our exec search processes. So, typically we're helping to build out, if they don't already have, and I will say that with confidence, that most of the companies that we invest in, they're family owned and operated, or they're founder owned and led. And so typically they will require more senior execs or leadership to surround them, to support them on this journey that they're about to start. So it's usually helping to build out those management teams and working with our exec search partners to make sure we're finding the best talent, really. I think when I think past that, a lot of it is around, driving and leveraging what I would bucket as organizational design or development programs or strategic initiatives related to organizational health and that takes shape in a lot of different ways. So for some, it's like, how's the workforce being incentivized? And is that something we need to figure out to, right size to make sure we're motivating the population below? Or does it have to do with how we're engaging the workforce or developing them? And is it work around, this year, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but a huge theme for us has been that mid-level, mid-manager development. That's just been so crucial. And so for a lot of our businesses, it's been, what are we putting behind there? What are we investing to kind of strengthen that middle layer a bit more? So those are just a few examples of, what I would call the organizational side or strategic initiatives from that lens. I'd say lastly, my role does touch what I own and am running our LEAD program, which is a more or less a CXO program. So we hire either, recent grads or second year MBA what will be grads, and plug them into our portfolio companies as chiefs of staff. So I help to run that program. And for us, it's all about talent. So that we view that as a foundational piece to really our talent pipeline. It's individuals who see themselves in the C-suite. And so it's a program that we've, worked heavily to put together, and hopefully are developing them into what is our next gen. So that's another piece of my role that might be a little bit different than others in the seat. But I'd love to throw it to Amanda. I know we have different perspectives, so that's a little bit about mine. I won't go deeper because I know we've got, I don't want to be conscious of time. I know we've got a lot of topics to dive into, but that's more or less the overview.
Great, thank you. And Amanda, obviously you have a different perspective working within a portfolio company. If you want to take a couple minutes to explain how you interface with your sponsor and maybe your view from things there.
Great. Yeah. I've historically had the most exposure to the operations or the value creation team that's responsible for working with portfolio companies to enhance performance and grow the business to create a greater value for the investors. So our company's leadership teams meet regularly with the private equity firm's operational team, our operating partner, to review our company metrics and identify areas of success or areas of needed improvement. And Maddie kind of covered this as well. Optimizing the business is always a focus. Where can we grow our margins and derive the most value for the company? This necessitates greater discipline, typically in all layers and functions, to ensure that our processes are working most effectively and that we're able to measure and continuously improve those processes. So focusing on these types of operational excellence measures and making sure that we don't compromise what we're delivering to our clients can help us to develop the talent we need and grow our organization while maintaining focus on what our purpose is.
Great. Fantastic. And then we can kind of transition into more of the second topic we have of evaluating teams specifically. So Maddie, just kicking it back to you, if you could just talk about what goes into the process of talent assessment for a target company's management team during that diligence.
Yeah, happy to. And I know I touched on it a little bit the last topic, but I'd say if we look deeper, there's a few different areas in which we cover. And I'd say first and foremost, we rely heavily on an outside partner. She's incredible. She's a IOP, or industrial organizational psychologist, and we rely heavily on her. I would say typically we're running some form of an org review during the diligence period. So that really helps us, look at management, understand who are the key players. What does the culture look like? How does their team really mesh? How effective are they? What are, maybe some key areas of strength or weakness, or maybe there's something that we're missing, and there's, a role that's really needed that none of us, picked out throughout our processes. So we rely heavily on her to sort of, augment the overall diligence that we run during that period. I'd say, somewhat of like a sub bullet underneath of that, we do use the Hogan, which is, for those that aren't familiar with that, it's a behavioral and personality assessment. And so again, I think all of these I should have backed up and said every single one of these are used as a tool. I wouldn't say any one of these is something that we use as a no go type of answer. I'd say the Hogan does help provide more background on top of that organizational review to get a better picture of, just the personalities or the weaknesses or, strengths when it comes to thinking about our team and the way we'll work with the portfolio company. I think a lot of it, and I'm sure Amanda can attest to this, is a lot of it is how well everyone is working together. That's always the huge piece. I think everyone underestimates how much time they will be spending with one another and how often you'll be communicating. And so that we view as a really key part. I'd say in terms of my role, obviously helping to work, with our partner on that. But outside of that, I will also go on site, meet with the CEO, CFO, other key members of the team. And again, take it from my angle and to understand, who are the folks there? What is the culture like? Just get a feel for the business. I'd say with all of those pieces together, it'll be something that I put together as like, here are the findings, and here's what, it'll really be the base of what becomes the, the human capital piece of the overall value creation plan. And really it's not like, it's really something to be used like, hey, here's what we see that's so great, and here are areas that we know right away that we can go in and improve. And maybe it is, hiring more people for the CFO, and they really need a strong controller or a strong FP&A lead that they haven't had before, and that'll help. So it's really comes out with like a list of recommendations that will, be used in that first 100 days to kind of run out. I'd say those are probably the baseline pieces that are helpful for this audience to know. And then it kind of takes shape depending upon what stage or how fast we're moving with the deal.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just curious, moving from diligence, maybe from acquisition to even integration, I'm sure that differs a lot. If you wouldn't mind just talking about maybe what it looks like from integration onwards.
Yeah, in terms of other M&A opportunities down the line, or
just working with, I guess, that same team once everything goes through the cadence that you have, post integration or throughout that.
I think that's extremely important. And I think, there is a level of chaos there that I think won't ever really go away. I think it's sort of, again, and that's why we take the team effectiveness piece and understanding who we're working with so important, because that communication line has to open and stay open. So, it'll be, again, depending upon the team and the structure and really what's on their plate, it'll probably immediately become a monthly operating call where we're all on, understanding what's going on within the business. And a lot of the times I'm also separately having, a weekly or bi-weekly catch up with the CEO or HR leader to understand how things are going, how can we help, get the messaging out of what is going on. Because again, I think for lots of the companies that we work with, they may not understand what this change is, or how can we make sure everyone knows that this is something that's great and will be, provide more resources for them, and it isn't, something that's, different than really what it is. So it's a lot of communication, and it's a lot of check-ins and back and forth. And I think more often than not, I will be on site, probably within, I'd say those first 3 months is a heavier travel period of time for all of us. I'm also on the value creation team alongside 2 others that work in marketing and finance. And so depending upon, again, the business, we're all usually taking turns and going there and making sure that they feel supported. So again, I'd say it looks different for everyone, but the common thread would be opening up the communication line and making sure that they've got what they need to kind of get this messaging out and figure out what we need to start chipping away at, and what are the, top 2 priorities.
Yeah, makes sense. Amanda, would love to hear your thoughts on what you've seen to be successful with assessing teams as well.
Sure. I first just want to comment that, some of the points that Maddie is making about the support from the private equity end is very helpful, because this is a challenge to grow rapidly and to support the organization through that growth. And the resources and help that the PE partners can give to the portcos is critical. And I think early identification of those needs and those regular meeting cadences is important, so that those support measures can be most successful. But in terms of assessing new teams, it's critical to have a leadership team that's particularly adept at ushering the organization through the adoption and acceptance of the frequent change that comes with rapid growth. What has brought the firm success in the past may need to be changed in order to level up and make the next growth milestone. So the leadership team has to make timely decisions to anticipate and solve problems, and ushering the organization through the acceptance of the frequent change that comes with rapid growth, and creating that culture of agility is crucial to retaining the talent that's needed to execute the work, keep the momentum, and deliver whatever it is that we deliver to clients with the same quality and timeliness. So that to me is critical, is this idea of these strong leaders who know what motivates their employees, and how to keep their employees engaged and lead them through the rapid change.
Great. And I think we all know private equity is unique, because with these businesses, there is a specific timeline to exit typically. How does that, I guess, timeline play into things like succession planning with teams, recruitment, retention? Amanda, go ahead.
I think that it's critical, kind of to your point. It's about, you always want to mitigate risk to your organization under any structure, but in particular, when you're on a timeline, you want to smooth out the risk and make sure your contingency planning and you have redundancies, so that there aren't single points of failure. So there's always succession planning happening, and development of new skills, identifying skills that need to be developed so that you have multiple layers in the organization. And then, of course, leveraging the expertise that the private equity partners may have access to or may have in-house, like the CXO program that Maddie described, where you might have resources internal to the PE firm or resources that they have been training. that you can leverage should you need the extra help or the extra, skills that you maybe don't already have in-house.
Great. Any thoughts from your end, Maddie?
Yeah, I would just say, and I'm looking at, I think that there may be some Q&A, so that might somewhat be tied to this. But yes, I would say that I can't say more, the piece around knowing how to incentivize your workforce. I think especially with the businesses that we work with, again, family owned or founder owned and led. So a lot of times all of this stuff is new, and it is a lot at once. So I think it's what can we do to make sure, the workforce is engaged? How can we make sure that they're being communicated with? I think in lots of cases, folks underestimate how, I hear this all the time, and I'm reminding our CEOs of this all the time. You just have to become the chief reminding officer around what's going on and why we're doing it. And I think that's what we found in the last year or so. I think just as companies are, really looking deep to figure out how they can stay on the growth plan or continue to grow. And it's getting everyone on the same page and understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so I think tying incentives to that and making sure that everyone is, understands the strategy is super important. I also think that when folks do, and we find that too, I mean, we, and happy to cover this too. I know we've got some other questions, but, one thing that we have rolled out over the last year is this organizational health survey, and that's given us a lot of data and understanding what's going on at every company. And it's for us, but it's really for our CEOs and the management team to understand, typically folks look at that top layer and want to understand how they're working together, which is super important, but we also want to look at, all the way down the chain. So one thing that came out of that was, I really love this business, but I don't know what's going on, or I don't understand what we're doing. And so that's also been a pretty big theme for us this past year, is making sure we are doing whatever we can to open up the communication lines as it relates to our management teams to the rest of the org. So that's been huge. And I think we've seen that has helped with retention when folks feel like they're brought under the hood and really get it. I think especially with our mid-level managers or that director level position that does get involved in arguably the most important layer at the businesses. They are really the ones driving a ton of the change. So that's what we have found in the last year or so.
Great, perfect. And we can tee up this question as it relates to retaining talent. So when PE firms leverage large sales forces but might underpay internal staff to avoid market rates or keep gross margins high, it can be hard to attract or retain effective talent. So I guess, Maddie, we can start with you, has been your experience with this, and how could it be addressed to avoid setting firms up for failure?
Yeah, I think that this has been, I think post-COVID world has really made this different. I think everyone can attest to that. I think the war for talent post-COVID was, it was, let's call it is what it is. It was crazy. And so I think we've seen that become more, when I stepped in a year and a half ago, there was still an element of that. I think this year we've done a much better job of, we found some partners that have been great, that have, I would say third parties that have helped us do comp studies and I would say comp benchmarking, but then just market studies as it relates to that. I think to the question's point, yeah, it's really difficult to retain talent, and it's really difficult to attract it. I think what we were finding, or at least, in my last year and a half years, when you look back, what is the cost of turnover, and actually running that number and understanding that, okay, we could pay, more than market, or we can compete at 75% in that market. And that would actually save us on the back end versus losing half of the folks because we're not willing to pay another 50 cents or whatever it is. And that's sort of taken in like maybe more of an hourly workforce population view, because Summit Park's portfolio has elements of that. And I think that's been a focus. We've really, actually just got off the phone with one of our HR partners who had just finished one of the comp analysis and was looking like, wow, we really are we're underneath, and no wonder we can't find our XYZ managers. It's because we're well under market. And so I think that discovery has been helpful for us, but it's something that we're still working on. And I think, again, it's hard, right? I think businesses in the last year or so have struggled with growth. And so that's not always an easy decision, but I think that the last year has shown us that it has helped tremendously with retention and engagement, and also has helped with, bringing, we really rely on a lot of our referral programs at our businesses. And so that has also helped too. It's a lot of word of mouth. And so we've seen progress there, but yes, I think it's tough. I'd love to hear Amanda's view. I know you're on the other side of it. So
I concur with the idea that you want good, reliable market data to then inform the decisions that the firm makes with regard to pay bands, hiring, and what we're offering, and really making a conscious decision, kind of like you said, do we want to be leading the market and paying above market rates? Do we want to be paying at the 75th percentile? And really being able to attract that talent with generous pay? Or do we want to emphasize or use other tools in the toolbox, the total rewards toolbox, right, with more generous benefits configurations and 401k match? And I've also found that it's important to communicate to employees the value proposition. Often, when we go to market to look for a job, as individuals looking for jobs, we look at that base comp, but some of us forget that the total rewards are at play. Is this new opportunity giving me as many days off, or is it giving me the same match on my 401k? So communicating to employees the entire employee value proposition of what you get by working here over and above that base pay has been helpful.
Great. And then I think we'll naturally hit some of the other questions as we go into our next topic of just really how to maximize the value of human capital. Amanda, would love to start with you and just some ways that you've seen to maximize value of human capital within businesses.
I think that one thing that comes to mind that's always at the forefront right out of the gate is who works here. Identify and evaluate the talent that already exists within the organization. Frequently, that hasn't been done for a very long time or hasn't ever been done. And you need to know what skills you have in-house in order to appropriately leverage the human capital, leverage people's expertise and bandwidth to maximize the value to clients. Likewise, we talked about this before, but where do we have single points of failure or risks to our business if a certain employee departs? Do we have continuity plans in place if a key person leaves? Are we identifying those skills? This becomes pretty relevant if a particular employee has been proposed to a client. Oh, this person is our expert who can give you this deliverable or execute this project really well. And we want to build an insurance policy so that we can maintain the value of human capital and not rely on single points of failure. Tools that we use in these scenarios are ensuring that we have more than one qualified person to fulfill a certain skill set, retention bonuses, project-based bonuses, and engagement with these critical, valuable employees to ensure that they feel engaged and rewarded for their importance to the organization. If we have good tools in place, we can maximize the human capital and provide more value to our business and to our clients because our employees are spending less time and energy managing and measuring. So what I mean by this, if we have good tools like good systems, processes, trainings, automation and leveraging ways that make us work more efficiently, then our employees are using more of their horsepower on what delivers value, rather than some of the more administrative or measuring work. I mentioned this before a little bit, but I think leveraging human capital also involves streamlining and implementing processes to have greater transparency for employees in a rapidly changing organization, greater transparency with metrics, and of course, better ability to plan. It allows the organization as a whole to anticipate and eventually succeed. Initially, the measures and planning and more discipline around processes can lead to more meetings and reviews to get all the stakeholders in alignment as to what's going on, why is it important, what are we up to? And understandably, the company is usually balancing things like your day job, your utilization, your responsibilities on projects with these greater demands on rigor and project planning and processes. But once these measurements and process refinement and optimizations take place, the appropriate stakeholders have the visibility they need to execute a project or plan more efficiently. There are fewer silos, there is more collaboration and fewer crises to react to. So that's in my point of view, some of the few most valuable things that can be done to leverage human capital, work more efficiently, and maximize the value primarily to end clients, but to the firm as a whole.
Great. And I think we've chatted before about specifically change management. But if you wouldn't mind touching on that and maybe just for the benefit of the audience, kind of giving a little color into what that looks like and what it is, that would be great.
And I think we have a question about this as well. And I want to talk a lot about this because rapid growth in any context necessitates agility and rapid change. And this is no exception. We spoke about it before, and it's one of the hardest skills and also one of the most important to manage change effectively. It takes a toll on the organization. People can become disconnected from the purpose, like Maddie mentioned. You know, the middle management or the employees at a company might not always know why we're doing this, what are we up to, and they need those reminders of the purpose. And people need a reminder of the purpose or mission and need to maintain focus. And that's what our leaders are here for, is to help us to maintain the focus on our purpose and our mission, and making sure that that focus is on every decision and in every message. Every decision is centered around what are we up to and what is our organizational direction. This is how our leaders are able to build alignment successfully so that everyone can lean in toward that one common organizational direction or goal.
Great. And Maddie, would love to hear your thoughts just on things you've observed that effectively enhance the value of human capital within these businesses.
Yeah, and I think I'll piggyback off something Amanda said. I think it's understanding who your talent is. And I think that's one gap I typically see when, I'll go in and speak to the team during diligence and try to understand, like, how do you know X, Y, or Z is ready for this? And it's usually an answer along the lines of, oh, we just know, or, they've been in the business for a really long time. And so a lot of it for us is mapped back to performance management and getting something set up there. Again, I'd mentioned the org health survey we've rolled out to all of our portfolio companies, and one, complete, blind spot, or maybe not blind for everyone. I think people are aware of that they could be better here, but I'd say one spot that everyone consistently had was around this performance management element, and not having enough tools or not having enough data to say, oh, we can confidently say that these folks a few layers down the org are performing, or we've got someone who's a hypo who's in the Florida office and we would have no idea otherwise. So there's been a lot of revamping or implementing performance management systems. I think that not all of our companies are in the spot to truly run, I come from a larger company experience, so I've seen the bigger succession planning exercises that take days and days to even get through. Our companies are nowhere near ready to complete something like that, but I think where we've tried to get their minds around is, let's look at this as like a risk exercise. Like, what if someone wins the lottery tomorrow, who could actually be their backup? And if we feel like these 5 people could be the backup for, HR, sales, ops, whatever you name it, then what are we doing right now to help develop those folks to be ready now and move from ready in 1 to 3 or ready 3 to 5, whatever it might be, whatever the criteria is. So for us, we've been able to kind of put together some of those smaller exercises because everyone needs to start somewhere. And we've got a lot of our businesses now running what, it's their branding, but call it like Rising Stars or Next Gen or Hypo type. I'll call it a summit. It's a 1 to 2 day, at the headquarters, and there's maybe some financial education for managers, and maybe there's a leadership element and whatever it is. But it's been a lot of, let's identify those folks and let's make sure we're developing them so that they are ready to step into those roles. And actually, growing your own talent is a lot easier. While difficult, it is a lot of the times easier than going and trying to buy your talent that may turn over. So we found that that's been a way to sort of, again, maximize the talent piece. I'd also say, outside of investing in those next gen folks, I think it's just generally training our mid-level. And I think that can be, anywhere from maybe a frontline manager that doesn't know how or has never been trained to give feedback or have difficult conversations. And so when we went to roll out this performance management, we realized, oh wait, there is a moment where do people even know how to give this? And we've never done this before. So that's a huge element. Again, people feeling like they are being invested in and they are being engaged. I'd say when I take it up to the senior leadership team, I think for that, from my view, it's really like right people, right roles. So a lot of the times when I'll go and meet with a business, not always, but often there's someone who maybe is head of sales, but really they've been only working on the product for the last 5 years. And so they're like, well, John Smith has always been our head of sales, but he's actually head of product if you look at what his role might do. So it's really trying to map back, like, what does the org look like? What does it need to look like to kind of fill in for the growth that we expect or we want to achieve, and making sure we get those folks in there. I think there's a lot around what does this person need to do versus, oh, this person's great and they've always been at the business, and that is also great too. You need those influencers, but does this person do the job that this needs to be, or whatever this next version of this team will look like? So I think a lot of it has been around that. And again, I think making sure for us, filling in talent, we tend to look for folks that have been in private equity before or have some sort of private equity backed experience. Not necessarily because it's all about private equity, but I think we tend to see that those folks understand the pace and the agility and dealing with a lot of stakeholders. You're dealing with the management team, you're dealing with the workforce below, you're reporting to the board, it's the fund levels involved. There's a lot of players in the mix and a lot of reporting and analytics and data. I tell our CEOs and other management team members, like, when you're working with data is our love language. So I try to be the in between there to help decode for both sides, or help decode for one side or the other. But we tend to see that those folks that have been in a high growth environment or fast paced environment tend to have those skills. So for us, it is looking for them, people with those attributes or characteristics to help fill in and join the team. So I'd say, that's really from the senior level piece. And then again, that mid-level manager training and development and identification of, the next gen is super important for us.
Mhm. Yeah, totally agree. I think we have a question as it relates to maybe considering candidates from outside traditional PE backgrounds. And as we know, PE can sometimes be a small universe, but are there any specific skills or experiences that you found transferable to PE portfolio companies, or maybe how you assess that potential to drive value creation?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if we take out the element that I mentioned of we tend to like having or seeing some sort of PE background, or that's not always the case. I'd say the biggest piece, and I was just on yesterday, we're in the middle of a search, and we're in a location where I don't know if having, I don't know how big the talent pool is, and so we're willing to look outside of that. I think the biggest piece is that individual being able to adapt. It just moves very fast. There's always something going on. I think Amanda knows that best because I'm, she deals with it or works in it every day, but there is just constantly something going on, and there's a new plan, a new initiative. We're pushing forward all the time. So it's having that adjustment and being able to switch gears very quickly and really relationship manage. Because I think, again, I feel like I'm a robot at this point, but because there's so much going on, it's so important that, there's transparency and open communication lines, because you can't juggle 20 things by yourself in an office. So I think that we tend to look for someone that is going to be able to manage a ton of relationships and be able to just the agility aspect and changing gears very quickly. Any way in which a candidate can prove that they have done that before, maybe it's not necessarily in a PE-backed environment, but in some sort of environment or leading major change is super important to us.
Great. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And then I guess as we're talking about the current hiring market, obviously has been fairly tight. Curious for both of you, over the last 12 months, maybe, how have you seen time to hire change? Maybe like increases, decreases, or has that kind of stayed the same?
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on it from maybe a senior leadership level, because I'm not always involved in all of the searches or backfills below, but I would say it really depends on the role. For CFOs, like that has been, I think private equity backed CFO is always a tough search. But it has felt increasingly more difficult in the last, call it maybe year and a half, or even more. But I think, especially now that, with the macro environment and, deals, the exits being delayed, I think we have seen that CFOs are tied up, and so therefore kind of causes less of supply. And so going out and trying to find someone that has that private equity backed experience as a CFO, it's much harder. And so I think we found our CFO searches to definitely be longer than I think we would want. So I think that's been somewhat of a theme. I think, outside of that, it's probably for us just been I don't know, different depending upon what we're looking for. I would just go back to the piece on the CFO, because that is someone that we're almost always looking for within our portfolio. So that would be the major theme. But I don't know, Amanda, if what you've seen further below or even at that director level.
Yeah, I'll echo your comments about the competitive job market, and we're still seeing that quite a bit. What I do notice, which contributes to time to fill, is that candidates are wanting to give longer notice periods to their existing employers, which impacts our timeline to put someone new into a vacant role. And so that's kind of been an interesting experience over the last year, seeing, those timelines extend because of the notice periods required.
Interesting. Great. And then we can jump into some of the questions here, but as it relates more so to company culture, we can start there. How do you approach maintaining the positive aspects of a company culture while addressing and involving the areas that need more improvement? And if there's any tactical examples either of you have with that.
I think that it's important to determine which good cultural aspects are in alignment and supportive of forwarding to the goals, mission, and growth of the organization. And those are the things that need to be preserved. If those good culture elements are items that are motivators or engagement factors for employees, it's important to preserve those and to look at how they do advance the mission of the organization. Practical example would be interesting project assignments. I think that that's something in my current organization that is valuable to our existing employees. I like that our firm works on really interesting projects. And so that's something that we can certainly commit to giving to our employees, is more of those interesting experiences, as well as opportunities to cross-train or see different types of projects so that they have that versatility that they're looking for in terms of their experience and skill set.
Yeah, I would say one example or exercise that we went through is I think from my view, it's not to say it's easier to spot bad culture items than good, but I think it's can be more obvious because it usually causes some sort of problem or other issues. So I would say, more recently in the last year, I keep referring to this organizational health survey that we take, but it helps us identify the company's top 20 influencers. And these folks aren't always, someone that's on the management team. A lot of the times it comes out with, could be a manager, could be an individual contributor, could be really anyone. And so what, in the middle of a business, in the middle of a time period when a business was going through a lot of cultural change and trying to drive some of these, different, I would say getting back to the roots and getting back to the good is how we did that. Was we identified influencers. We brought those folks together and said, hey, we know that, people rely on you, or they look to you for advice, or they look to you for career support, or fill in the blank. Like, we want to make sure you understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Again, getting back to this messaging of everyone is in alignment and everyone understands. And so, making an effort to almost front running important conversations or important announcements, or, if the company is going to go through a RIF, for example, making sure that the right people know before that information goes out, or maybe there's something great that's going to happen. Maybe we're going to offer more PTO or something, making sure that group understands why, or what that they can expect out of whatever the announcement is. I think we found that that's helped a lot, and sending those folks off with the messaging and using them as your, front horse to kind of push that through the org is, a way that we've found success. Listen, it's a lot easier said than done. I think arguably one of the most difficult pieces of this is culture change, or any sort of change generally. So whether that relates to the culture or if it relates to operations, frankly, we see the same things. And so we've tried to take that angle maybe in different ways depending upon the business, but this was specifically more of a manufacturing, it's got a larger blue collar workforce, and so it was around ops, and there was culture pieces that were kind of contributing to operational issues. And so in that case, that tactic really worked well for us, and I think it's something we'll hopefully rely on in other cases, but it is very difficult. There's no silver bullet, unfortunately.
Great. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to add with that?
I think that what Maddie's talked about, I've done informally as well, floating ideas and getting input from people in the organization who appear to be influencers. And, you know, hearkening back to giving people the right tools to work most efficiently and maximizing human capital, working with those stakeholders to say, does this tool look like it's going to be something that adds value to you? Will it be convenient? Is it practical from your perspective, to make sure that they're bought in, or at least curious or willing to experiment, so that when the new tool or resource or whatever is rolled out to the organization, there's a teaser there, or there's a preview, and it's not something that's been foisted upon people, but it's something that is more collaboratively decided as a value add.
Great, thank you. Right, and then another question we got for recently acquired businesses. So Maddie, would love to start actually with your perspective on this, but maybe for recently acquired businesses that aren't used to fast growth, might feel overwhelmed about the impact of that growth on their workload, haven't had that experience before. How do you handle that, and what are ways to keep key team members on board?
Yeah, and I assume this is in, you know, if we've got, it's like an add-on that's going on type of situation. I would, so for that, and I think we deal with this a lot, right? We've got a business that's going through, a platform that's going through a lot of change, and then you add on another company who's like, oh my gosh, what on earth is happening here? In really great ways, by the way. I mean, it's nothing negative, but I do think that you've got a lot of balls in the air, especially in that scenario. I think what we've relied on is creating, you know, hate to go back to the basics here, but we just recently went through a similar situation in the spring, and we all sat, meaning we, value creation team, members of management, and other deal partners, and looked at a huge Excel checklist of all the things we needed to keep track of. And I felt like, while that sounds like a lot, it definitely at least keeps everything on one page, and is helpful as we're thinking to make sure no ball is dropped, right? So I think in another scenario, I think, you know, maybe at this point is 2 years ago, there's so much going on as it relates, and I think the one thing you cannot mess up is making sure the people at that add-on feel like they're becoming part of the company, and making sure that first day is positive, or they feel like they understand what's going on, or do we have senior leadership going on site to make sure they feel welcomed? Are they all going to get a company polo, or is there some sort of welcome bag, or how can we create a FAQ to make sure all of their questions are answered in advance, because they might have a lot as it relates to how will they be paid now, or benefits the same, what happens to my PTO? So while it's a lot of change, I think that, again, it's, you know, do your best to put it all in one spot, make sure you've got owners attached to those things, make sure the people are the most important part of it. And so to make sure you wrap your arms around them, I think that, you know, and I can see part of the question still, I think getting used to the change and the faster pace is just something that has to be learned a little bit. And I think, again, there's just a lot of communication that has to go around, what does this mean for me? And so that's why I think just being so thoughtful about that, that first week, that first day, you know, the first 100 days of that add-on, and sort of who's going to own a lot of those change management initiatives is really important.
Great. And then Amanda, from your perspective, just shifting gears a bit, what can maybe non-HR executives or non-HR employees do to assist HR leaders like yourself? And how can they institute more of a culture to using HR as a lever?
That's a great question. I think that the biggest thing is to meet one-on-one with direct reports and listen to what their goals are, their initiatives are, to ensure that they're aligned with what the overall company direction is, and focusing on your locus of control and the employees span of control with regard to impediments. A lot of times, and this kind of goes back to the question Maddie just answered, but when people resist change or feel overwhelmed, it's because there's this sense of loss of control. And to focus or reframe things to figure out what can I control to influence this situation and be most supportive to our overall goals. So I think frequent, regular rather one-on-one meetings are critical to keeping employees engaged and keeping everybody moving in the same direction.
Great. And then I guess just would love to hear as we kind of start to get towards the end of our questions, just I know we had a question about sourcing talent, but any other, I guess, trends or things that you're seeing specifically within the talent space or private equity space as it relates to this?
Beyond trends, I think this kind of blends the two, but I think it becomes even more important to have a good partnership with the operational leadership and the talent acquisition team, because when we have a competitive talent market, we're relying on those leaders to know what they need and to decide quickly when they find it. But additionally, we ask them to work their networks. If they're a subject matter expert or have a deep network in a certain area, they may be asked to leverage that to help us find the right person or people to fit the vacancy we have. And so I've just seen that we've done that a lot more in the last year, is leaning on those operational partners at every phase of the recruiting process to ensure that we find the right person, we know when we've found them, and that we act quickly to go get them.
Yeah, and I would say I can see the question about sourcing CEO talent. I would say it feels better than CFO talent at the moment. But one theme that we're seeing that probably isn't a surprise to anyone on this call, but I think finding a CEO or really any exec member that's willing to relocate, I think we're not seeing that as much. I think there's still a lot of folks who know that they're in need, so they want to work remotely or they don't want to fully relocate their family, and so it's some sort of hybrid setup. I think we're still seeing that trend. I'd also comment that from our view, and I've chatted with other talent partners in the last month or so, is it does feel like it's the year of the CRO or head of growth or different head of sales, just as folks are looking to sort of grow their top line and lock some of those things down. It does feel like more than ever we're trying to find the right sales leader. So that's certainly been a trend.
Interesting. Great. Perfect. Well, we only have a couple minutes left. I guess any final thoughts from either of you on anything you wanted to communicate with our audience?
Just wanted to say thank you for having us, and appreciate the dialogue, and learned a lot from Maddie as well. And so it was great to have a chat today.
Yeah, thank you. This was great. Thanks, Sarah.
Well, thank you both so much. Thank you as well to our audience for joining us and for all of the questions that we received. Thank you again to our sponsor, Centre. As a final reminder, a recording of this webinar will also be available on PrivateEquityCXO.com. So, all right. Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.